A small thing before we begin, and it is the same small thing as always. Tell me in the comments where you are and what time it is there, because I read them, and because that map is now a large part of why I keep doing this. A like helps the next person find the story. A subscription means you do not have to remember. This one is quiet, and it is cold, and it is called the Alderminster Letter. The letter that brought us into it was 4 pages long, and it was the 4th that Miss Winifred Ledger had written that autumn, and it was the 1st that anybody had answered. Sir, I am assistant to the librarian of the Dean and Chapter of Alderminster, or I was until the 2nd of November, when Canon Bellhouse died. I have written to the Dean, to the Chapter Clerk, and to the Superintendent of Police, and I have been very kindly told by all 3 that I am overtired. I do not think Canon Bellhouse fell down that stair. I think somebody put him down it.
My grounds are not medical, and I have none of the sort of evidence that is any use, and I shall not waste your time with what I felt. What I have is a number. On the 14th of October, I collated Volume 9 of the Wraxall papers for the new hand list, which means that I counted the leaves, because the hand list gives the collation of every bound volume, and Canon Bellhouse required it done by hand and checked. Volume 9 had 246 leaves. On the 11th of November, I counted it again, because of what Mr. Yeatman had found in it, and it had 247. I have said this to 4 people. 3 of them told me that I had made a mistake in October, which is possible, and one of them, who is a scholar and was very patient with me, explained that a leaf may easily be missed in counting, which is also possible. Nobody has counted it since, and I am not permitted to touch that volume any more. I am 28, and I have been in that library 9 years, and I am not overtired. I have £4. Moan years faithfully. Winifred Ledger. Holmes read it twice, and then read the 3rd paragraph aloud a 3rd time. There is a great deal of art in that letter, and I do not think she knows it. She does not say the leaf is a forgery. She does not say Mr. Yeatman put it there. She does not say the canon was murdered because of it, though she plainly believes all 3. He put it down. She says only that a number was 246 and is now 247, and that is not an opinion and cannot be argued with, and it is the only thing in this affair that anybody has been able to weigh. Watson, look out the trains to Alderminster. Alderminster is a small cathedral city in the west of about 11,000 people, and the cathedral is the whole of it. We came into it at 3:30 on a grey Thursday afternoon in the last week of November, and I have not been back, and I remember the walk from the station better than I remember most places I have lived in. You come up a street of poor shops and turn under an arch, and the noise stops. The close at Alderminster is about 11 acres of wet grass, with a gravel walk round it, and 11 or 12 houses of various ages on 3 sides, and on the 4th side is the cathedral, which is grey and enormous, and rather ugly, and quite silent. And the rooks in the elms make more noise than the whole of the city put together. The chapter library is over the north cloister. You go in at a door in the cloister wall, and there is a stone newel stair
11 feet from the bottom step to the top, and turning to the right, worn into hollows by 400 years of feet, and lit by 2 loops in the wall about the size of a hand. And at the top there is an oak door, and beyond that a room 140 feet long under a timber roof, with the presses down both sides, and 9,000 books in it, and about 40 of them still on chains. Canon Tristram Bell House had been found at the foot of that stair at 20 minutes to 7 on the morning of Wednesday, the 3rd of November, by Barnaby Tuffin, the sacrist, who had come to sweep the cloister. He was 74. He had been librarian to the dean and chapter for 41 years. He had been dead, the doctor thought, since 10 or 11 the night before, and he had a fractured skull and a broken collarbone, and he was lying with his head towards the cloister and his feet on the 3rd step, and there was a candlestick on the 4th step with the candle out of it, and the library door at the top was shut, but not locked. The inquest sat on the Friday, and the jury took 9 minutes. He went up to that library at all hours of the day and night for 41 years, said the very Reverend Lambert Prendergast, Dean of Alderminster, when we were shown into the deanery at 5 o'clock. And he went up it with a candle in one hand, and generally a book in the other, and he was 74, and I have told him about that stair, and the chapter has told him about that stair, and my predecessor told him about that stair. Mr. Holmes, I know why you are here, and I will save you a good deal of trouble. Miss Ledger has written to you. She has. She is a most excellent young woman, and she was devoted to him, and she has had a very bad autumn. The dean was 70, with a long, mild, obstinate face, and she is in the position, which is not a rare one, of being unable to believe that a thing she cares about could have happened by accident. That is all it is. There is no mystery here at all, except the ordinary mystery of a good old man dying on a wet Tuesday night, and I am extremely sorry that you have come so far. Then let us take the other matter, said Holmes, the letter. Something changed in the room, and it changed in a way I have seen a dozen times, and never in a deanery. The letter, said Dean Prendergast, is the worst thing that has happened to this church in my lifetime. I had better set out here what the Wraxall business was, because the whole of the case turns upon it, and because it is not a subject on which an Englishman of my generation could be neutral, and I was not. Ambrose Wraxall was Dean of Alderminster from 1662 until his death in 1691. He was a considerable man in his day, a scholar, a correspondent of half the learned men in Europe, a builder of almshouses, and the founder of a charity which has given away bread and coals in that city every winter for 206 years, and gives them still. In the July of 1685, the Duke of Monmouth landed at Lyme, and in the September the king's judges came into the west, and among the men taken up in Alderminster were 3. Robert Netley, a fuller, his brother-in-law, Simon Upcott, and a boy of 19 named Kilby, who had gone out of the city with them and had come back. All 3 were hanged in the marketplace on the 24th of September, and the boy Kilby was hanged last, and for 200 years there has been a story in Alderminster that they were taken because the dean gave them up. It is not in any book. It is in the city.
It is the sort of thing that is said in a public house and denied in a pulpit, and every generation of Alderminster men has been told it by its grandfathers, and every dean since 1730 has had to know about it, and the answer of the cathedral has always been the same, that there is not one line of evidence for it, that Wraxall's own papers show him interceding for the prisoners with Lord Chief Justice Jeffreys, and being refused, and that a city which hangs 3 of its own men will always find somebody to blame who is not itself. There is a brass to Wraxall in the north aisle of the nave. There is a window. There is the charity. And on the 23rd of September every year, until 1897, the Wraxall bread was given out at the west door by the dean in person. And now, said Prendergast, there are men in this city who spit on that brass, and I have had it washed twice, and I shall not have it moved. We spent the Friday evening in the city and not in the close, and I would not have missed it, and Holmes said afterwards that it was the only part of the case in which he learned anything he could not have got out of a book. Alderminster, below the arch, is a different place. There are 11 public houses in the 4 streets between the Close Gate and the river, and the trade of the city is gloves, and there has been a glove works there since 1740, and the men who work in it have been Alderminster men for 11 generations, and they had all read the Athenaeum of the 16th of October, or rather, they had all had it read to them out of the Western Gazette, which reprinted it entire on the 19th, under the heading, The Dean and the 3 Men. We were in the Bell in Fore Street for 2 hours, and Holmes did not say who he was, and did not need to.
"There's been a tale in this city about that man since my grandfather's time," said a glove-cutter of about 60 named Kilby, "and every dean that come has said it was a lie, and they said it very kind, and my father had it said to him by Dean Hallam in this street in 59. And now there's a gentleman been in their own library, and found it in their own book." "You are a Kilby," said Holmes. "There's 9 Kilbys in this city, and we're all off the same, and the one they hanged was 19, and he weren't married, so we're off his brother." He drank some of his beer. "I'll tell you what's took hold, sir, and it's not the hanging. It's 200 year of being told we made it up. I have thought about that sentence a good many times since. There was a good deal else, and most of it was worse. Somebody had written on the door of the north porch in whitewash in the last week of October, and it had been scrubbed, and the shadow of it was there in the spring. Somebody had spat on the brass more than once, and a verger had been put to watch it on Sundays, which is a duty I would not care to have. The Wraxall bread had been given out on the 23rd of September as usual, 4 weeks before the letter appeared, and 11 of the 22 recipients had sent it back in the November, and one of them had sent it back to the deanery in a sack. And on the Saturday morning we went to see Miss Drusilla Wraxall, because the dean asked Holmes to, and I have never been more reluctant to go anywhere. She was 81, and lived in the smallest of the houses on the west side of the close, with 1 servant, and she was the last of that family in Alderminster, and there were 2 great-nephews in Canada. She received us in a room with 11 pieces of good furniture in it, and a portrait over the fire of a man in a wig and bands. "That is he," she said, before either of us had sat down. "It was done in 1679, and it is not a good picture. and I have looked at it every day for 53 years. Do sit down. You will want to ask me whether I believe it, and I shall save you the trouble, because I have had 11 people here since October, and every one of them has taken 20 minutes to get to it." "Then tell me," said Holmes. "I do not know," said Miss Wraxall. "I am 81, and I have known that man in that frame better than I have known most of my relations, and I do not know, and I shall die not knowing, and I want you to understand that I am not being brave about it. I am telling you the truth, which is that a letter has been produced, and I cannot read it, and I have to take somebody's word, and I have had a great many people's words in 7 weeks, and they have not agreed." She poured out tea with hands that were perfectly steady. "I will tell you the part that has been hardest, and it is not what you expect. I have not minded the newspapers. I minded very much a thing that Canon Bellhouse said to me on the 9th of October, 2 days after it was found, in this room, in that chair." "What did he say?" "He said, 'Drusilla, I have believed it for 30 years, and I have never once said so to you, and I am ashamed of that, and I am more ashamed that I am glad." Her mouth moved slightly. "And then he came back on the 1st of November, 3 weeks after, and he sat in that same chair, and he said, 'I want you to put out of your mind what I said to you in October. I was wrong to say it, and I may have been wrong altogether. Give me until Christmas.'" Holmes had gone very still. "You are certain of the date?" "It was the 1st of November, because it was All Saints, and he had been at the 8 o'clock, and he came on afterwards, and he died the next night." Miss Drusilla Wraxall put the teapot down. "I have told that to the dean, and to the chapter clerk, and to the superintendent of police, and every one of them has been very kind to me, and not one of them has written it down. Are you going to write it down?" "I am going to write it down," said Holmes, "and I am going to ask you to say it again in a court of law in the spring. And you will be 82 by then, and you will be cross-examined by a man who is paid to suggest that you are confused about the date." "Then I shall bring my diary," said Miss Wraxall. Mr. Crispin Yeatman came to the deanery at 6:30 that evening at the dean's request, and I want to record my own first impression of him honestly, because I was wrong about him for 11 days, and Holmes was not, and because I have never much enjoyed reading my own account of it. He was 34. He was thin and dark and rather badly dressed, and had the stoop of a man who has spent 11 years bent over folios in cold rooms, and he had the pleasantest voice I have ever heard out of a pulpit or in one. He shook hands with me twice. He was diffident about his own work to a degree that I found almost painful, and when the dean, who could not keep it out of his voice, said something about the effect of the discovery upon the city, Yeatman put his hands over his face for a moment and said, "I know. I have thought about nothing else since October, and I would give a great deal to have found anything else in the world." He had been 11 years upon Ambrose Wraxall. He had begun as an undergraduate. He had published 2 papers, one on the Wraxall correspondence with the Royal Society, and one on the almshouses, and neither had made the smallest stir, and he had lived, so far as I could discover, upon a small annuity from an aunt, and 100 a year from a college that had not renewed it. He had been given the freedom of the chapter library in the November of 1895 by Canon Bellhouse himself on the recommendation of 2 professors, and he had worked in it 4 days a week for 2 years, and Canon Bellhouse had come to be, in the old man's own phrase, quoted to me afterwards by Miss Ledger, the only person left alive who cares about Wraxall as much as I do. And on the 7th of October, 1897, at about 11 in the morning, at the second table under the third window, Crispin Yeatman had turned over a leaf of volume 9 of the Wraxall papers, and had found a letter that nobody had ever cited. It is a single sheet, written on both sides in Wraxall's small, upright hand, dated at Alderminster, the 12th of September 1685, addressed to a person named only as Sir, and unsigned, as a great many of the letters in that collection are, being retained drafts. It says, in substance, and in about 200 words, that the writer has made such inquiry as he could, quietly, among his own people, that he can give the names of 3, and gives them, Netley, Upcott, and the boy Kilby. That Netley was certainly at Sedgemoor, and the others went out with him. That he is unwilling that any more of the city should suffer for the guilt of a few, and that he begs that the matter may now be considered closed. It was published in the Athenaeum on the 16th of October, with a facsimile of 11 lines of it, under Yeatman's name, and it went round England in a fortnight. "I have read it 100 times," said Yeatman that evening, "and I have never once been able to read it without feeling ill. The worst thing in it is the last clause. He gave up 3 men, and he did it to stop the thing spreading, and by his own lights he was probably right. And the boy Kilby was 19. "Where is the letter now?" said Holmes. "In the volume, in the library." He looked up. "Mr. Holmes, I have been asked 11 times whether I am certain it is genuine, and I shall tell you what I have told all of them. I am not a court. I am a man who has read 4,000 documents in that hand, and I have never seen a better one. The paper is right. The ink is right. The hand is right in every particular, including the 2 or 3 tricks Wraxall had that are not in any published facsimile, and that nobody could imitate who had not sat where I have sat. And Dr. Corville of the museum has seen it and says the same, and Professor Ravenscroft, who would be delighted to see me made a fool of, has seen it and says the same." "That is a very complete answer to a question I did not ask." Yeatman flushed. "I beg your pardon." "Not at all. It was a very good answer, and I shall come back to it." Holmes stood up. "One thing more tonight. When you found it, was Canon Bellhouse in the library?" "He was at the far end. He was always at the far end." "Did you show it to him at once?" "I took it to him within about a minute," said Crispin Yeatman, "and I have been glad ever since that I did, because he was the first man in 200 years to read it, and he sat down and read it twice, and then he said, 'Well, there is an end of that,' and took off his spectacles, and did not say anything else for about 5 minutes. We saw Miss Winifred Ledger at 9 the next morning, in the library, and she had the keys, and she opened it for us herself, and Barnaby Tuffin, the sacrist, stood at the bottom of the stair the whole time with a broom, and did not pretend to be sweeping. She was 28 and plain and quick, in a black dress that had been dyed, and she took us up the room to the second table under the third window, and stood with her hands behind her.
I shall tell you what I did on the 14th of October, and then I shall tell you what I did on the 11th of November, and I shall not say anything about Mr. Yeatman, because I have said things about Mr. Yeatman in the last 3 weeks that I had no right to say, and I have been very properly reproved for it. Tell me the counting. The hand list, she said. The chapter voted for a new hand list of the manuscripts in 1894, and it has been my work since. Every bound volume gets a collation, what it is made of, how many gatherings, how many leaves, foliated or not, and what is wrong with it. Canon Bellhouse would not have it done from the old catalogue. He said the old catalogue was 140 years of men copying each other. It had all to be done by hand, with the book open, counting. And you counted volume 9. On the 14th of October, between 11 and 1 o'clock, at this table. She put her hand flat on it. 246 leaves, 20 gatherings, mostly of 12. I wrote it into the slip book at the time, and the slip is in the slip book now, and it is in pencil, and it has not been altered, and you may see it in 4 minutes. Did you know then about the letter? Everybody in the close knew about the letter by the 8th. It was found on the 7th. She met his eye. Yes, I knew, and I did not look at it, and I did not think about it, and I counted 246 leaves in the same way that I had counted the 8 volumes before it, and that is the whole of my evidence, and it is worth exactly as much as I am. And in November, Canon Bellhouse died on the 2nd. On the 11th, the chapter clerk asked me to make a note of the state of volume 9, because there was to be a photograph taken for the Athenaeum, and I had it out at this table for an hour, and I counted it because I am in the habit of counting it, and it was 247. Holmes sat down on the corner of the table. Miss Ledger, why did you count it the second time? She did not answer at once, and when she did, she was not quite steady for the first and only time in 3 weeks. Because of what he said to me on the 1st of November, she said, the day before he died. He came down the room at about 4 o'clock with his spectacles in his hand, and he stood where you are, and he said, Winifred, when you did the collation of the 9th volume, what did you make it? And I said, 246. And he said, ah, and stood there for a bit. And then he said, do not put it in the slip book again. Leave it as it is. And he went back up the room. And that is all? That is all, said Miss Ledger. And I have not told anybody that, because it is the sort of thing that a young woman who is overtired invents. Professor Giles Ravenscroft came down from London on the Monday to see the volume, having been engaged by the chapter in the November to report upon it, and Holmes spent 4 hours with him and was entertained the whole time, and got in the end 1 useful fact and 2 days' work he need not have done. He was 67, very large, very deaf on the left, in a frock coat that had been made in about 1878, and he had held a chair of history for 21 years, and had published 11 books, 4 of which were still worth reading, and he despised Crispin Yeatman with the particular completeness of an old man who has recognized a better eye than his own. Of course it is genuine, he said, before he had got his gloves off. I have said so in writing to the Dean, and I shall say so to you, and I shall go on saying it, and I may tell you that saying it has cost me more than anything I have said in 40 years, because I have spent the whole of my professional life maintaining that Ambrose Wraxall was an honest man, and I have been laughed at for it by a good many people who have now discovered that they always thought otherwise. You examined it. I examined it for 3 hours on the 11th of November in that room, with Swaffer breathing at me.
Ravenscroft sat down heavily. The hand is Wraxall's. I do not say it is like Wraxall's. I say it is his, and I have read more of him than any man living, except that unhappy young person in Minster Street. There are 4 peculiarities in his secretary hand after 1680, and every one of them is in that letter, and 2 of them have never been printed anywhere, and 1 of them I have never mentioned to a soul, because I was keeping it for the 2nd edition. Then you are satisfied? I am entirely dissatisfied, said Professor Ravenscroft, and I have not been able to sleep since the 16th of October, and it is not the hand, it is the letter. Explain that. It is too useful. The old man put his enormous hands on his knees. Mr. Holmes, I have worked in that period for 41 years, and I will tell you what a 17th-century letter is like. It is about a horse, and a lawsuit, and somebody's daughter's marriage, and in the 4th paragraph, in 9 words, in the middle of a sentence about hay, there is the fact that you have been looking for since 1856. That is what they are like. They are not about the thing. That letter is about the thing. It is 200 words, and every one of them is on the point, and it gives 3 names, and it gives the reason, and it gives the date, and it does not mention one single other matter, and it is unsigned, which disposes of the signature, and it is a retained draft, which disposes of the question why it never went. I have read it 11 times, and it is the most convenient document I have ever handled, and I cannot fault a syllable of it. You have said this to the chapter? I have said it to the chapter, and the chapter has asked me whether I have any evidence, and I have none whatever, and I am an old man with a grievance, and everybody in that close knows it. He looked out of the window. I shall tell you the whole of my position, and you may make what you like of it. If that letter is genuine, then I have wasted a good deal of my life, and I shall say so in print in the 2nd edition, and it will be the best thing I have ever written. What I shall not do is join in a whisper against a young man, because his discovery is inconvenient to me. There is a good deal of that in my trade, and I have suffered from it myself, and I would rather be wrong. Holmes was very quiet for a moment. Professor, I am going to ask you something, and I want you to take it as it is meant. Have you at any time attempted to buy Wraxall material for anybody? Ravenscroft went a dark red. You have been talking to Swaffer. I have been talking to a great many people. Then you may have it from me and not from him. In the August I was approached by an agent for a library at Baltimore who wished to buy the chapter's Wraxall books outright, and I told him what they were worth, which is what any man in England would have done, and I told him the chapter would not sell, which they will not, and I took no commission, and I have his letter and my answer, and you may read both of them tonight. He got up. And Swaffer has been putting it about since October that I have an interest,
and I have not spoken to Swaffer since, and I shall not, and I am 67, and it is very stupid of me." Going back across the close, Holmes said, "2 days on Ravenscroft, and I knew inside 40 minutes that it was nothing. Watson, do you see what he gave me? The letter is too useful. The letter is too useful, and it is the only piece of criticism anybody in England has made of that document, and it is worth nothing whatever in a court, and everything to me. A forger cannot help himself. He knows what he wants the paper to say, and he says it, and the one thing he can never manufacture is the enormous, tedious, irrelevant clutter of a real life going on round the fact." The chapter gave Holmes the volume on the Saturday morning, after an hour and a half in the chapter house, during which the dean said very little, and the chapter clerk, Mr. Edgar Swaffer, said a great deal. And the thing that carried it in the end was Holmes's undertaking that nothing whatever should be done to the book, that Mr. Swaffer should sit at the table throughout, and that Miss Ledger should be present, which the dean granted, and Mr. Swaffer opposed. Volume 9 of the Wraxall papers is a folio in a Russia binding of 1878, about 3 inches thick, with the arms of the dean and chapter on the boards and gilt edges, and it weighs, I should think, 14 pounds. Holmes did not open it for 11 minutes. He looked at the spine and the joints and the head and tail bands, and he stood it on its foredge on a sheet of white paper, and looked along the gilt with a lens, and he weighed it in his hands twice, and Mr. Swaffer became visibly more comfortable, having decided that we were dealing with a charlatan. Then he opened it flat at the middle and let it lie, and looked at the way it lay, and shut it, and opened it at leaf 131. The letter is leaf 132. It is a little smaller than the leaves on either side of it, by about 1/16 of an inch at the foredge, and rather more at the tail, and it is a shade lighter, and none of that means anything whatever, because in a bound volume of 246 separate letters, gathered from 6 different sources over 40 years, no 2 leaves are the same size or the same color. "It is tipped in," said Holmes. "It is what?" said Swaffer. "It has been attached by pasting a narrow strip along its inner edge to the leaf before it. It is not sewn into the gathering. Look at the gutter. Every other leaf in this volume was guarded and sewn by Apothecary in 1878, and you may see the thread if you open it far enough. And this one is stuck." He turned it delicately with the back of a fingernail. That in itself proves nothing at all. Half the manuscript volumes in England have leaves tipped in, and a binder does it, and a librarian does it, and it may have been done in 1878, or in 1878, and again in 1884. Then what are you telling us? I am telling you what I see, in order, and I shall tell you what it means when I have finished seeing it. He took out his lens again. The paste is not the paste. Apothecary used a flour paste with alum in it, as everybody did, and it has gone the color of weak tea in 100 other places in this volume where he used it, and where it has come away it powders. The paste under this strip is white. It is elastic, and it smells faintly of oil of cloves, which is put into a paste to keep it from going sour, and which no binder in this country used before about 1890. Mr. Swaffer got up and came round the table. "And now the gilt," said Holmes. "This volume was gilded on all 3 edges in 1878, with the leaves in the press. Any leaf that was in the book at that moment carries gold on its foredge.
Look at 131. Look at 133. Now look at 132. I looked, and once it had been pointed out, I could not stop seeing it, and Mr. Swaffer, who was a heavy, florid man of 60, sat down again without meaning to. The foredge of the volume, closed, is a solid sheet of gold. Leaf 132 is trimmed a shade short of the others, and where it lies, there is a hairline of white, no thicker than a thread, running down the gold. "That is not proof either," said Holmes. "A leaf trimmed short shows white whether it was put in last year or in 1878, and a good many volumes have such a line for perfectly innocent reasons. Now, Miss Ledger, I want a length of horsehair." "There is a bow in the song school," said Miss Ledger, and was gone 4 minutes. What followed took about a quarter of an hour, and I have described a good many demonstrations of Holmes's, and I have never seen one that a jury understood so quickly. "There is a worm in this library," he said, "and there has been since about 1880, and you will find him in every press on the north side, and Canon Bellhouse's reports to the chapter mention him in 1884, and again in 1891, and he was fumigated twice. He got into this volume after it was bound, and he bored through it from the outside of the backboard, and he went through the leaves from 118 to 147, and came out again, and then he died or went elsewhere. Now, a worm does not go straight, he wanders, but he wanders continuously, and the hole he leaves in leaf 119 is within a hair's breadth of where he went into leaf 118, because he is boring through paper that is pressed tight, and he cannot get out and start again. So the holes are in a line, and the line drifts, and in this volume it drifts towards the tail at about 1 part in 40, so that at 118 the hole is 2 inches and 1/8 from the foot, and at 147 it is 2 inches and 5/8. Take the hair, thread it into 118. He did it himself, with a hand I have watched perform a great many delicate things, and never a more delicate one, and he drew the horsehair through leaf after leaf, and Mr. Swaffer turned them for him one at a time, and it went through 119, and 120, and 121, and Miss Ledger counted them aloud in a flat voice, and at 131 it stopped. Leaf 132 has a hole in it. It is a neat round hole about the size made by a fine needle, and it is 2 inches and 3/4 from the foot, and the holes on either side of it, in 131 and 133, are at 2 inches and 7/16. "There," said Holmes, and put the hair down. "And now," said Holmes, "the arithmetic, which is the part Miss Ledger has been laughed at for, and which is, in fact, the only unanswerable thing in this room. A bound book is not a heap of leaves. It is made of gatherings, and a gathering is a number of sheets folded together and sewn through the fold, and it always contains an even number of leaves, and you may count the gatherings from the outside by opening the book at the middle of each and looking at the thread. Mr. Swaffer, be good enough to hold it open there. 20 gatherings of 12 leaves, and one at the end of 6. 20 12s are 240, and 6 is 246. That is not Miss Ledger's opinion. It is the sewing.
done by Apothecary in 1878, and it cannot be argued with, and it cannot be miscounted, because the thread is either there or it is not. Now count the leaves, 247. There is therefore one leaf in this volume that is not part of any gathering and is not held by any thread. And there is no possible innocent arrangement in which a sewn book contains an odd leaf that the binder did not put there. Miss Ledger did not miscount in October. She counted a book that had 246 leaves in it, and in November she counted the same book, and it had one more. Miss Winifred Ledger said nothing at all. She had turned away and was looking down the length of the library at the presses on the north side, and after a moment she took her spectacles off and cleaned them on her handkerchief, which took her a considerable time. Nobody said anything for a while. Somewhere below us in the cloister, a boy went past whistling and was stopped by somebody. "Mr. Swaffer, I want you to be clear about what has just happened, because you will be asked about it. A leaf with no hole in it would prove that the leaf was inserted after the worm passed, and it would be strong evidence, and it would not be conclusive, because a worm sometimes skips a leaf where the paper is heavier or where there is a fold. But this leaf has a hole in it, and the hole is 3/8 of an inch out of the line, and no worm that ever lived came out of leaf 131 at 2 7/16, and went into leaf 133 at 2 7/16 by way of a hole at 2 3/4. A leaf without a hole is an accident. A hole in the wrong place is a man who thought about it." Mr. Edgar Swaffer, chapter clerk of Alderminster, put both hands on the table and said, "God forgive us," which I thought a very reasonable observation. He spent the whole of the Sunday on the ink, and got nothing, and was better company that evening than he had been all week, which is a thing about him that I have never been able to explain to anybody. He had brought down what he called his travelling apparatus, which is a japanned box about the size of a small portmanteau, containing 11 bottles, a spirit lamp, a quantity of filter paper, and a lens on a stand, and he set it out on the wash-hand stand in our room at the Mitre, and worked at it from 9 in the morning until 7 at night, with the door locked, because the chapter had given him leave to take 4 fibres, and not 1 fibre more. "An iron gall ink," he said, "is oak gall, and iron in the form of a sulphate, and gum and water, and it is what every man in Europe wrote with from the 12th century until about 1860. Now the sulphate of iron of the 17th century was got by boiling down the liquor that runs off a heap of weathering pyrites, and it was filthy stuff, and it carried copper, and it carried manganese, and it carried a good deal else, and the proportions vary from one country and one decade to another. The sulphate you may buy today at a chemist's in the Fore Street of this city for 4d is pure. Therefore, if the ink upon leaf 132 is modern, it will show no copper, and every other letter in that volume will show copper, and I shall have him. At 7 o'clock he came out and sat down on the end of the bed. "Every letter in that volume shows copper," he said, "and so does leaf 132. "Then it is genuine." "Then he has read the same books I have," said Holmes, "and he has made his ink out of a recipe of 1660, and he has got his vitriol from the right place, which in this country
means a chemical works in Lancashire that still makes it in the old way for the leather trade, and he has done it with about 4 times the care I should have expected, and I have wasted a day, and I am extremely pleased." "You are pleased? I am delighted. Watson, a forgery that is caught by the ink is the work of a man in a hurry. A forgery that survives the ink is the work of a man who has been at it for months and has thought of everything. And a man who has thought of everything is a man who has left a trail 11 months long instead of a trail 11 days long. He has had to buy things. He has had to write to people. He has had to obtain a sheet of paper, and he cannot make paper, and that is where he is. He was on the floor by then, with the county directory and a Bradshaw. I shall want the Exeter train in the morning." I must now put down that Holmes spent the whole of the next 3 days upon a theory that was wrong, and that I encouraged him in it, and that it was, in every way, a more comfortable theory than the true one. He thought that Canon Tristram Bellhouse had made the leaf himself. I can set out the case in a paragraph, because he set it out to me on the Saturday night in the coffee-room of the Mitre, and I did not have one word to say against it. Nobody in England knew the Wraxall hand as Bellhouse knew it. Nobody had such access. Nobody could have got at that volume so easily, or at the paste, or at the press. He had been librarian for 41 years, and had been passed over for a canonry residentiary twice, and for the deanery once. And there was the thing that Miss Ledger had said, and that everybody in the close said in a lowered voice, that Canon Bellhouse, who had spent his life upon Wraxall, had privately believed for 30 years that Wraxall gave those 3 men up, and had said so once, in 1889, at a dinner, and had never said it again. A man who has believed a thing for 30 years and cannot prove it, said Holmes, and who is 74 and has 1 winter or 2 left. It is not a wicked motive, Watson. It is the worst motive there is, which is the desire to be right before you die. And then a young man of 34 finds it on the 7th of October, and publishes it under his own name in 9 days, and the old man watches it go round England with somebody else's name on it, and something in him turns over. On the 1st of November, he asks Miss Ledger about the collation, and tells her to leave the slip-book alone, which is exactly what a man says who has decided to undo it. And on the 2nd of November, he goes up to that library at 10 o'clock at night to take the leaf out again, and he is met at the top of the stair. It held together for 3 days, and it was destroyed by a doctor's day-book. Canon Bellhouse's medical man was a Dr. Gorse of the Close, and I went to him on the Tuesday morning as one practitioner to another, and he gave me the whole of it in 11 minutes and let me copy the entries. Bellhouse had had, since the winter of 1894, a coarse tremor of both hands, worse in the right, which Gorse had entered as senile, and had treated with nothing, because there is nothing. It had increased. In the January of 1897, the old man had given up writing his own letters, and Miss Ledger had written them. In the June, he had given up signing the chapter accounts, and had them signed by the vice-dean. And there are 2 entries in Gorse's book, in the March and in the August, of the canon coming to him about it, and asking both times whether anything at all could be done, as I have a piece of work I should like to finish. He could not have ruled a line, said Gorse. He could not have held a pen for 200 words. He had not been able to for a year, and everybody in this close knew it, and I do not think one of them ever considered what it meant to him. I came back across the wet grass and told Holmes, and he heard me out standing at the window of our room at the Mitre with his hands behind him. "Then I have spent 3 days," he said, "constructing an elaborate injustice against a dead man of 74, who was, I now perceive, the only person in this affair who behaved perfectly from beginning to end. He suspected the leaf within 4 weeks. He verified the one fact he could verify, which was the count. He told nobody, because he was going to be certain first, and because the person he would have had to accuse was the only friend he had made in 20 years. And he went up that stair on the 2nd of November to look at it again by himself at night, and somebody was waiting at the top. He turned round. And I shall now go and find out how a man of 74 comes to be lying at the bottom of a stair with his spectacles folded in his pocket." We went up that stair a great many times between the Tuesday and the Thursday, and 11 of them were at night, and I do not much care to think about it. Barnaby Tuffin, the sacrist, had the keys, and came with us and stood at the bottom with a lantern, and he had found the body, and had talked about nothing else for 4 months, and was very willing to talk about it again. "He come up here of a night twice a week regular," said Tuffin, "always with his own candlestick, and never with a lamp. And I've said to him 100 times, 'Canon, you'll go down them stairs one of these nights.' And he'd say, 'Barnaby, I've been going up them since Palmerston.'" "Where were you that night?" "In my bed at 9:30, and my missus and my daughter'll tell you, and I never heard nothing, and my house is the other side of the North Walk, with 2 doors and a garden between." He rubbed his chin. "But there's a thing I've told the inspector, and he wrote it down, and nothing come of it. That cloister door at the bottom, that's got a latch you can hear across the green when it's dry, and it were dry that night. It come on to rain about 1. "Did you hear it?" "No, sir, but my daughter's a light sleeper, and she heard it twice, and she thought it were the cannon going up and the cannon coming down, and she never thought no more about it till the morning, and then she was that upset she couldn't say what time either of them was." "Twice," said Holmes. "Twice, sir, up and down." "Not 3 times?" Tuffin looked at him. "Well," he said slowly, "that's it, ain't it? There's up and there's down. There's not up and down and down." Holmes went up the stair by himself then, and was gone about 10 minutes, and I stood at the bottom with Tuffin and his lantern, and listened to my own breathing. It is a very bad stair. It is 11 feet from the bottom step to the top, and it turns to the right, and there are 21 steps, and they are worn into hollows in the middle, so that a man's foot slides towards the newel, and the 2 loops in the wall give you nothing at night. And there is no handrail, and there never has been, only the newel on one side and a stone wall on the other. If Canon Bell House had fallen down at any night in the last 41 years, there would have been nothing to say. Holmes came down carrying his own candle in his left hand at the height of his shoulder, which is how a man carries a candle down a stair when he wants to see the steps, and stopped 3 from the bottom. "Watson, stand where I am." I went up and stood there, and he took the candle from me and stood at the top and blew it out. and I have never in my life been in a dark so complete. There is no window in that stair after the first turn, and the cloister below is roofed. Now come down. I could not do it. I got down 4 steps with my right hand on the wall and my left foot feeling for the hollows, and then I stopped and stood still, and after about a quarter of a minute I said something that I am not going to write down, and Holmes struck a match. "Yes," he said, "now consider it. A man in the dark upon that stair does not fall down it. He stops, exactly as you stopped, and he stands there, and he shouts for Tuffin, and he waits until somebody brings a light. The one thing that will take him down it is being made to move backwards. He had a candle. He had a candle when he went up. He had no candle when he went down, because the candle was out of the stick and lying against the wall 2 feet from the bottom, and the stick was standing upright on the 4th step, and no fall in the history of the world has ever produced that arrangement." He sat down on the 6th step with his elbows on his knees. Somebody put the candle out, and then somebody came down these stairs in the dark, past a dead man, and put a candlestick on the 4th step, and went out at that latched door, with the whole close asleep round him, and did not shut the library door behind him, because he had not got the key, and did not think of that for 4 months, and possibly has not thought of it yet. The evidence about the stair was in the coroner's depositions, and in a police constable's notebook, and in the memory of a sacrist, and it had all been taken down by people who were satisfied, and it took Holmes 2 days to turn it over. There were 4 things. The first was the spectacles. Canon Bellhouse's spectacles were found in the breast pocket of his coat, folded in their case. He was going up a dark stair at 10 o'clock at night with a candle in order to look at a book. Miss Ledger, who had seen him 100 times, said that he went up with them on his nose or in his left hand, and that he had never in 9 years put them in the case except at his own table. The second was the candlestick. It was standing upright on the 4th step from the bottom, and the candle was out of it, and lying against the wall 2 feet away. Holmes carried a candlestick of the same pattern up that stair 11 times, and dropped it from various heights, and it went to the bottom every time, and it never once stood up. The third was the door at the top. Canon Bellhouse locked that door whenever he left the library, day or night, and had done for 41 years, and the key was in his trouser pocket when they found him. On the morning of the 3rd of November, the door was shut and unlocked. The 4th was the man himself, and that was mine. The fracture was of the left parietal, and there was a fracture of the right collarbone, and the abrasions were on the backs of both forearms and on the right elbow. The stair turns to the right as you go up, which is to say, to the left as you come down, and a man who catches his foot coming down such a stair goes forward and to his own right, and puts his hands out and breaks the left collarbone and marks the palms. I said so at the inquest in the February in about 150 words, and the words that counted were these: that in my opinion the deceased had gone down that stair backwards, without his hands free to save himself in the ordinary way, and that a man goes down a stair backwards when he has stepped back from something at the top of it. The paper took Holmes to Exeter. "He had to have a sheet," he said. "Everything else can be got. Ink can be made from a recipe in 20 minutes, and the recipes are printed. The hand can be learned by a man who has read 4,000 documents in it for 11 years, and I will say for him that he learned it as well as it has ever been learned. But paper cannot be made. He had to find a genuine blank leaf of about 1680, of English make, of the right substance, with the right chain lines, and it had to be big enough, and it had to have lain flat and dark for 200 years, so that it had not gone brown at the edges. Where does a man get such a thing? Out of a book, said Holmes. There is one in every second book of the period, and there are two in a great many, and they are worth nothing, and there are 11,000 booksellers in England. There were not 11,000 who had sold anything to Mr. Crispin Yeatman. There were 4, and their names were in his own notebook, which he had lent to Holmes without the smallest hesitation on the Wednesday afternoon, in order to help him, and which is the only imprudent thing that man did in the whole of the business. Mr. Havelock Tuke, of the Cathedral Yard, Exeter, had sold Mr. Yeatman on the 11th of March, 1897, a defective copy of a volume of sermons printed at Oxford in 1683, wanting the title and 11 leaves at the end, for 2 shillings, and had entered it and remembered it, because a gentleman who buys a book that has no title page is a gentleman who wants it for something. And the book was on the 3rd shelf of the little bookcase in Mr. Yeatman's sitting-room in Minster Street, Alderminster, where he had left it because there was no reason on earth to hide a 2-shilling book of sermons. It had 2 blank leaves at the front, and one of them was gone, and it had not been cut out. It had been torn out along the fold, slowly, the way a careful man tears paper, and the stub was still in the book. Mr. Crispin Yeatman's rooms were the first floor of a house in Minster Street, kept by a Mrs. Padbury, and we went into them on the Thursday morning with Inspector Rowe and a warrant, and Yeatman himself, who had been told at 9 o'clock what was intended, and had said, "Then I had better come with you, and save you breaking anything." I have been in a good many rooms that were searched, and I have never been in one that told me less. There was a sitting-room with a table in the window, 4 shelves of books, a japanned box of note-slips, 3 tin trunks of transcripts, and a photograph of a woman of about 60 in a black frame. There was a bedroom with a bed in it and a text on the wall. There was no whiskey, no cards, no letters from anybody, and no comfort of any kind, and the fire had been laid and not lit because he could not afford to light it in the morning. He had £111 in the Wilts and Dorset Bank, and £40 of it was borrowed. The 11 years were in the tin trunks. There were 4,300 and some transcripts in his own hand, every one dated and referenced, and 11 notebooks, and a card index in a cigar box, and the whole of it was the work of a man who had done nothing else since he was 23. Rowe went through the trunks, and Holmes went through the shelves, and it was on the shelves that it was. It took him 4 minutes. He came to the 3rd shelf and put his finger on a small brown octavo without a title on the spine, and took it out, and opened it at the front, and stood quite still. 11 sermons preached upon several occasions, Oxford, 1683, wanting the title and 11 leaves at the end. 2 blank leaves at the front, one of them torn out along the fold, slowly, from the top downward, the stub still in the book, 1/8 of an inch of it at the head and 1/4 at the tail, with the tear running crooked round a flaw in the paper about 4 inches down. Yeatman was standing by the window with his hands behind him, and he watched Holmes take it out, and he did not move, and he did not say anything at all. "Mr. Yeatman." "Yes?" "Is this your book?" "It is my book, and I bought it at Exeter in the March, and gave 2 shillings for it, and it is in the notebook you have in your pocket, which I lent you." He said it perfectly evenly. "And you will now ask me about the leaf, and I shall tell you about the leaf, and I would rather do it here than at a police station, and I would rather do it with Mr. Rowe writing it down." I have set out what he said about the tracings in the chapter house 3 days later, and he said it that morning in Minster Street in almost the same words, and he never afterwards altered one of them. What I want to put down here is what happened when we came out. Mrs. Padbury was in the passage. She was about 50, in an apron, and she had had him 3 years at 18 shillings a week, and she stood in front of Inspector Rowe with her arms folded, and told him that Mr. Yeatman was the quietest gentleman she had ever had in the house, that he had sat up with her husband 4 nights in the January when there was nobody else, that he had never once been behind with his money, and that whatever they thought he had done, she would like it known that he had carried her coals up 2 flights every Tuesday for 3 years, because he had seen her doing it. Yeatman stood in the passage with his hat in his hand and looked at the floor while she said it, and when she had finished he said, "Thank you, Mrs. Padbury," and went out into the street between 2 policemen. I said something to Holmes about it on the way back to the close, and he walked about 30 yards before he answered. "Yes," he said, "it is nearly always so, and it is the part of the work that I have never got used to and do not expect to. Watson, I have known perhaps 6 men in my life who were wicked all through, and they were all of them stupid, which is the only reason I caught them. The able ones carry the coals." We had the chapter together on the Friday afternoon in the chapter house, the Dean and the Vice-Dean and 2 canons, and Mr. Swaffer and Inspector Rowe of the County Constabulary, and Holmes asked them for leave to lift the pasted edge of leaf 132, and it took 40 minutes, and the Dean gave it in the end because Miss Ledger, who had not been asked to speak, said 11 words from the back of the room. "If it is genuine, sir, then lifting it will prove it." Holmes did it with a bone folder and a sponge of warm water, and it took him 25 minutes, and he did not damage a fibre of it, and when the leaf came free, he laid it on the table beside the volume of sermons, and put the 2 torn edges together, and moved the leaf 1/8 of an inch until it took. They fitted. They fitted the whole length, tooth into tooth, the way 2 halves of a torn thing fit, and nothing else in the world does. And where the tear had gone through a flaw in the paper, the flaw ran across the join, and Inspector Rowe put a magnifying glass on it, and then took his hands off the table and put them in his pockets. Crispin Yeatman was sent for and came, and I have set down what he said as nearly as I can, because it was the most remarkable performance I have ever sat through, and because it was not, at any point, a performance. He was shown the 2 torn edges, and he looked at them for perhaps half a minute. "Yes," he said, "that is my leaf out of my book." Nobody had expected that, and it took the room a moment. "You admit it," said Rowe. "I admit that I tore a blank leaf out of a 2-shilling book of sermons in the March, which I did, and which I have never denied and shall never deny, because it is a thing I have done a dozen times, and so has every scholar in this room. I tore it out to make a tracing. There is nothing else you can trace a 17th-century hand upon. Modern paper will not take the ink, and it will not lie flat, and you cannot see through it." He put his hands on the back of a chair. "I traced 11 lines of the Wraxall hand upon that leaf in the March, in order to teach my own eye, and I have done the same with 4 other hands in 11 years, and I burnt it in the June. It is on the table in front of you." "That," said Yeatman, "is a leaf that fits my leaf, which means either that it is mine, or that a man who wished to ruin me took it out of my rooms, and I have no way of proving which, and I am perfectly aware of it." He went through the whole of it in that manner for 1 hour and 40 minutes. The paste with oil of cloves in it. The volume was in Pothecary's hands again in 1884 for a repair to the joint, which is in the chapter accounts, and Pothecary's son was using a prepared paste by 1884, and Pothecary's son is dead. The wormhole out of line. A worm does wander, and he had seen a track in a Bodleian volume that jumped half an inch. And if Mr. Holmes was proposing that a forger had made a hole in the wrong place, then he was proposing a man clever enough to think of a worm, and stupid enough to measure it wrong, and Mr. Yeatman had never met such a man. The count. Miss Ledger had counted 246 in October and 247 in November, and one of those was wrong, and he would not for the world say a word against Miss Ledger, and he had himself twice miscounted a gathering in that library, and had been corrected by Canon Bellhouse. The night of the 2nd of November. He had been in his rooms in Minster Street from 8:30, and his boots were wet, because he had walked round the close before supper, as he did every night of his life. And when Rowe put it to him at the end that he had gone up to the library that night, and had been met at the top of the stair by an old man who had found him out, he said, quite quietly, "Canon Bellhouse was the best friend I ever had, and the only man in England who cared for what I care for, and he was 74, and he was worth 11 of me, and I would have gone down that stair myself before I would have touched him." And Inspector Rowe arrested him, and he said, "Yes, I see," and asked whether he might take a book. I have to set down that I believed him. I believed him in that room, and I believed him for 11 days afterwards, and I said so to Holmes twice, and once at some length, and I am not going to soften it now. The paste could have been Pothecary's son, the worm could have wandered, Miss Ledger could have miscounted, the leaf could have been taken out of his rooms by anybody in that close, and if you granted the first 4, you could grant the 5th, and there was not one thing among them that would not have been laughed at by itself. What Holmes said to me on the 2nd of those 11 days is the only sharp thing he said to me in that case. "You are doing exactly what a jury does, and I am not going to scold you for it. But I will tell you what is wrong with your reasoning,
and I want you to have it in your head when you go into the box. You have taken 5 improbabilities, and you have supplied an innocent explanation of each of them separately, and each of your explanations is possible, and I concede every one. Now put them together, and ask yourself for an innocent explanation of the fact that all 5 happen to the same leaf of the same volume in the same 11 weeks. A worm that wandered 3/8 of an inch in the one leaf out of 246 that is also the leaf that overturns 200 years of history. A binder's paste of 1884 under the one leaf that is also tipped in and not sewn. A miscount by the most accurate person in that library in the one volume she counted twice, and a torn blank of 1683 in the possession of the one man who found it. That is not 5 coincidences, Watson. It is one thing seen 5 times. He was tried at the assizes in the March, and the Crown, upon advice, charged manslaughter and not murder, and I have never been sure whether that was mercy or arithmetic. It lasted 3 days. Miss Winifred Ledger was in the box for 2 hours and 11 minutes, and was cross-examined for one of them, and did not vary by a syllable. And the counsel for the defense, who was a very able man, made the mistake of asking her whether she had been fond of Canon Bellhouse, and she said, "Yes, sir, and I counted it before he died, and I counted it after, and my liking him has nothing to do with the number." And the judge wrote it down. The jury were out for 4 hours and convicted, and Yateman got 15 years. He made no statement at any time. He said nothing at the police court, nothing at the assizes, nothing when the sentence was passed, and he has said nothing since, except in writing. The letter came to me, and not to Holmes, in the June, from Portland, and I have it still, and I have never known quite what to do with it. It is 4 pages long, and it is perfectly courteous, and it does not mention the stair at all. It is about the letter of the 12th of September, 1685. It sets out, in 11 numbered paragraphs, the reasons for believing that document genuine. It deals with the paste and the gilt and the worm. It observes that a leaf may be tipped into a volume by an honest hand, and lifted out of it by a dishonest one. And it ends, "I am not writing to persuade you of my innocence, which is now nobody's business but mine, and I know quite well what a man in my position is thought to be worth. I am writing because you are the only person connected with this affair who will be read after we are all dead, and because you were, I think, prepared to believe me, and because, when you come to write it, you will put in the horsehair and the sermons and leave out the letter itself. And in 50 years, a man who wants to know what Wraxall did will read your account and find nothing in it at all. He gave them up. I did not make that up. I found it. C. Yateman." And there, of course, is the whole of it. And it is why I have been 11 years writing this, and why I have twice put it back in the box. Because the chapter of Alderminster has never published a word about that leaf. They could not. Holmes went down again in the May at the Dean's request, and sat with the chapter for 3 hours, and what he told them was that they had exactly 2 courses, and both were bad. They could say nothing,
in which case a good many scholars would go on citing the Athenaeum of the 16th of October, and the letter would work quietly in the literature for a century. Or they could publish the whole story of the horsehair and the paste and the torn sermons, in which case every serious man in Europe would learn that a leaf had been successfully inserted into a bound and gilded volume in the chapter library of Alderminster, and had gone undetected for 11 weeks by the librarian, the chapter clerk, 2 professors, and the keeper of manuscripts of the British Museum. "And on the day you publish that," said Holmes, "every document in this library, and in 9 other cathedral libraries that are kept as this one is kept, becomes a document that somebody may have put there. You will have removed 1 forgery and cast a shadow over 40,000 things that are perfectly genuine, and no scholar will ever again cite an Alderminster manuscript without a sentence of apology." They took the second course, in the end, but they took it slowly, and it was 1904 before the chapter's statement was printed, and by then the letter of the 12th of September had been quoted in 2 histories and a Life of Jeffreys, and had been read out at a lecture in Manchester, and it has been quoted since, and it will be quoted again. The brass is still in the north aisle. The dean had it washed a 3rd time. The Wraxall bread is given out at the west door on the 23rd of September, and Miss Drusilla Wraxall, who was 81 and the last of that family in the city, came down and stood at the door in 1898 in a black bonnet and gave it out herself, which nobody asked her to do, and which the dean told me afterwards he had not been able to watch. Miss Winifred Ledger was appointed librarian to the dean and chapter of Alderminster in the July of 1898, which had never been done before, and has been done twice since, and the new hand list was finished in 1903, and it gives the collation of every bound volume in that library, counted by hand with the book open. There is an entry in it for volume 9 of the Wraxall papers. It says 246 leaves, and then, in a bracket, 247 as bound 1878, 1897. See chapter minute of 11th May, 1898, which is as near as the Church of England has ever come to putting a knife in a man's ribs in print. I went back to Alderminster once in the September of 1898, on my own account, and without telling him, because I had been asked to, and because I wanted to. Miss Winifred Ledger had been librarian to the dean and chapter for 2 months. She had the room at the head of the stair that had been Canon Bell houses, and there was a handrail on the stair, which the chapter had voted for in the June, 11 weeks after the trial, and 41 years after it was first asked for. She took me up the library, and we walked the length of it, and she showed me the new hand list, which was then about 1/3 done, and she showed me the slip-book with the pencil entry of the 14th of October, 1897 in it, which she had not altered, and would not alter. "They still come," she said. "There were 2 gentlemen from Germany in the July, and a man from a newspaper in the August, and they all want to see leaf 132, and I show it to them, because the dean has said it is to be shown to anybody who asks. It is in a case at the end there, with the sermons beside it, and the 2 torn edges together under a glass." "Do they believe it?" "About half," said Miss Ledger. We stood at the window for a bit. You can see a good deal of the close from that window, and about 11 roofs of the city beyond it. Dr. Watson, there is a thing I have wanted to say to somebody for a year, and I have not been able to say it to anybody in this close. I did not do anything clever. I counted a book. It is the dullest work in this library, and it is the work they give to an assistant because a canon will not do it. And I have done it to 211 volumes, and I shall do it to 9,000 more if I live. And it is the whole of my contribution, and there is nothing else in me. And I have thought since October that if I had not been doing something so dull, nobody would ever have known. I said something, I do not remember what. I remember that she was not asking for anything, and that she had thought it out a long while before. He was killed for it, she said. That is the part. He was 74, and he came down the room to my table on the 1st of November and asked me a number, and he was dead the next night, and the number was mine. You are still not comfortable, said Holmes to me a good while afterwards, when the letter from Portland had been in my desk about a year. I am not, nor am I, and I will tell you why, and it is not any doubt about the man. He did it, and I proved it, and the jury were right. What I cannot get past is the arithmetic of the damage. He killed one old gentleman of 74 who had 11 months to live and would have died in his chair with his boots on. That is what he was tried for, and that is what he will serve 15 years for, and it is right that he should. And in 11 weeks, with a torn leaf out of a 2-shilling book, he made it impossible for anybody ever again to answer a question that 4 generations of honest men had been trying to answer. Nobody will be tried for that. There is no name for it in any statute, and in 100 years, Watson, there will be men arguing about Ambrose Wraxall in rooms we shall never see, and every one of them will be arguing about a piece of paper that was torn out of a book of sermons at Exeter in the March of 1897, and not one of them will know it. He was quiet for a moment. There is a handrail on that stair now, he said. The chapter voted £11 for it in the June of 98, having declined to vote it in 1873, in 1884, and in 1891, on the ground that it would spoil the stone. I mention it because it is the only alteration that anybody made in Alderminster as a result of the whole affair, and because it is the sort of thing an institution does, instead of the thing it cannot bear to do.